Take off that apron. People like you don't belong in a room like this." The words cut through the grand ballroom with the cold precision of a polished blade, and for one suspended heartbeat, every conversation faded beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Hundreds of guests turned their heads toward the young black waitress standing beside a silver tray of untouched champagne flutes. Maya Carter didn't answer. She simply lowered her eyes for a brief second, steadied her breathing, and held the tray a little tighter, as though dignity itself weighed no more than a few pounds, but still deserved to be carried with both hands. The annual Brooks Foundation Charity Gala filled the historic Langford Hotel with nearly 500 of the most influential people in Chicago. Fortune 500 executives exchanged handshakes beneath towering marble columns. State officials laughed beside decorated veterans. Musicians filled the air with soft jazz while servers moved silently through the sea of tailored tuxedos and elegant evening gowns. Every table shimmered beneath warm golden light. Every polished wine glass reflected another carefully rehearsed smile. Tonight wasn't simply another charity event. It was the night Nathan Brooks intended to announce the largest partnership his company had ever secured, a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars and years of relentless work. Every detail had been planned down to the placement of every flower arrangement and every folded linen napkin. Nathan Brooks believed perfection wasn't optional. It was expected. At 48 years old, the white CEO had built Brooks Innovations into one of the country's fastest-growing technology firms. Newspapers called him brilliant. Investors called him fearless. Employees often called him intimidating after he had already left the room. He valued discipline above emotion, efficiency above sentiment, and appearances above almost everything else. In his experience, people formed opinions within seconds, and one mistake could stain a reputation that had taken decades to build. So when his eyes landed on Maya Carter carrying a tray across the ballroom, he noticed something no one else cared about. A tiny splash of sparkling water had darkened the cuff of her white serving jacket. It wasn't even the size of a quarter, but to Nathan it looked enormous beneath the ballroom lights. His jaw tightened. Without raising his voice, he motioned toward the event manager, who hurried over immediately. Nathan never looked away from Maya as he spoke in a measured tone. "She shouldn't be on the floor tonight. Find someone else." The manager hesitated, glancing toward Maya with visible uncertainty. She had arrived 3 hours early, helped another server whose car had broken down, memorized the seating chart, and quietly carried extra meals to elderly guests without being asked. There hadn't been a single complaint. "Sir," the manager said carefully, "she's actually one of our strongest servers." Nathan's expression never changed. That wasn't a suggestion. Across the ballroom, Maya sensed the eyes gathering around her long before anyone explained what was happening. Years of working restaurants had taught her to recognize that silence. It was the silence that arrived just before someone judged your appearance instead of your character. She remembered her grandmother's words from years earlier in their small South Side apartment. "People may decide who you are before you ever speak, sweetheart. Let your actions introduce you anyway." Maya had carried those words through every overnight shift, every unpaid bill, every interview where smiles faded the moment she walked into the room. Tonight, she reminded herself of them again. She lifted another tray, offered a warm smile to an elderly couple searching for their table, and quietly guided them through the crowded ballroom as though nothing had happened at all. No one noticed that, within the next few minutes, the entire evening would depend not on the powerful man standing beneath the spotlight, but on the quiet waitress he had just decided didn't belong. Maya Carter had learned long ago that kindness rarely announced itself with applause. Most of the time it looked like arriving before sunrise, tying on a neatly pressed apron, and remembering details nobody else noticed. She remembered which guest preferred iced tea without lemon, which volunteer struggled to hear from his left ear, and which elderly donor needed an extra moment before climbing a staircase. Those small things never appeared in annual reports or newspaper headlines, but to Maya they mattered because every person deserved to feel seen. She had grown up on the south side of Chicago in a modest brick apartment where money disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. After her mother passed away from a long illness, her grandmother, Evelyn Carter, became the center of her world. Evelyn had once worked as a school librarian and filled their tiny apartment with worn novels, old history books, and quiet lessons about grace. Even now, despite living with Alzheimer's disease, there were mornings when she would smile at Maya and whisper, "Leave every place a little brighter than you found it." Maya carried those words with her like an invisible compass. Every dollar she earned paid for medication, groceries, and the small home where her grandmother received daily care, while Maya worked double shifts. She rarely complained because she believed gratitude could survive even the hardest seasons. Earlier that afternoon, before the first limousine had rolled beneath the hotel entrance, Maya had already helped decorate the ballroom. She climbed ladders to adjust floral arrangements, polished hundreds of glasses until they reflected the chandeliers like tiny stars, and quietly assisted a nervous new server named Olivia who kept mixing up table numbers. Instead of criticizing her, Maya smiled, took out a folded seating chart from her apron pocket, and spent 15 minutes walking her through every section until Olivia's shaking hands finally became steady. "You make people feel like they can breathe," Olivia had whispered with a grateful laugh. Maya only smiled and replied, "Everyone deserves someone patient on a stressful day." Even after the uncomfortable exchange with Nathan Brooks, she refused to let bitterness settle into her heart. As she moved between tables, she noticed an older gentleman searching the ballroom with uncertain eyes. His silver cane rested awkwardly against a chair while guests hurried past without. Noticing him, Maya gently approached, introduced herself, and asked if he needed help finding his seat. The man smiled with visible relief. His name was Walter Harrison, a retired firefighter attending the gala with his daughter, who had become separated from him during the crowded reception. Maya offered her arm, walked beside him at his pace, and guided him safely to table 7 near the stage. Along the way, she pointed out the jazz quartet, joked about how impossible hotel floor maps could be, and waited until his daughter arrived with grateful tears in her eyes. Neither of them knew that several members of Nathan's executive team had quietly watched the entire interaction from across the ballroom. One of them even remarked that Maya seemed to know the guests better than most event coordinators. Nathan overheard the comment, but dismissed it without a word. His attention remained fixed on schedules, speeches, and arriving investors. Somewhere behind the polished confidence that had built his empire, pressure continued to tighten around his thoughts. Every minute brought another important handshake, another expectation, another chance for something to go wrong. As musicians prepared for the evening's headline performance and servers carried the first plated dinners into the ballroom, a faint flicker crossed one of the enormous crystal chandeliers high above the dance floor. Most guests never looked up. Maya did. She paused for barely a second, studying the unusual shimmer before quietly continuing toward the next table, unaware that the tiny detail she had just noticed would soon become the difference between panic and hope. Nathan Brooks adjusted the cuff of his tailored jacket as another round of applause echoed across the ballroom. Every smile directed toward him felt rehearsed. Every congratulatory handshake carried an invisible question. Would tonight prove that Brooks' innovations belonged among the nation's most influential companies, or would months of negotiation collapse beneath a single mistake? The answer seemed to rest inside a leather portfolio, sitting only a few feet from the stage. At precisely 8:30 that evening, Nathan planned to sign a partnership agreement with Harrison Capital, a respected investment group prepared to finance the company's nationwide expansion. Reporters had already gathered outside the hotel entrance. Financial news channels were broadcasting live updates. Investors expected confidence. Employees expected certainty. Nathan had spent nearly 3 years building toward this single announcement, sacrificing weekends, vacations, and more nights of sleep than he cared to admit. Failure was simply not an acceptable outcome. Across the ballroom, executives from both companies exchanged polite conversation while photographers captured carefully arranged moments beneath the towering chandeliers. Crystal glasses chimed softly as servers delivered the first course with practiced precision. The room smelled faintly of fresh herbs, roasted filet, and white roses arranged in elegant centerpieces. Everything appeared exactly as Nathan had envisioned, yet an uneasy feeling continued to settle somewhere deep inside him. It was impossible to explain. Nothing obvious was wrong. Still, the atmosphere somehow felt unusually fragile, as though the evening balanced upon glass thinner than anyone realized. Maya continued moving quietly from table to table, offering warm bread, refilling water glasses, and checking on older guests before they ever needed to ask for assistance. While replacing silverware near the center of the ballroom, she noticed the same chandelier flicker again. This time the light dimmed for nearly 2 full seconds before returning to its warm golden glow. Her eyes instinctively followed the heavy chain disappearing into the ornate ceiling nearly 30 feet above the marble floor. Something did not feel right. She glanced toward a nearby wall where one of the hotel's electrical panels sat concealed behind decorative molding. A faint buzzing reached her ears between the music and conversations, so quiet that almost no one else could have noticed it. Maya looked toward the event manager. He was already rushing between photographers, caterers, and television crews, answering questions from 3 different people at once. She hesitated. The ballroom was full, the schedule was running perfectly, and she did not want to create unnecessary concern over something she could not prove. Even so, the uneasy feeling refused to leave. Near the entrance, Walter Harrison smiled as Maya refilled his water glass. "You notice everything, do you not?" he asked kindly. Maya laughed softly. "My grandmother always said that paying attention is another way of caring." Walter nodded with quiet admiration. "That is a rare gift these days." Their brief conversation ended as the lights steadied once more, allowing the evening to continue without interruption. On stage, the Master of Ceremonies welcomed guests and announced that Nathan Brooks would soon deliver the keynote address before the historic signing. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause while cameras turned toward the podium. Nathan inhaled slowly, straightened his shoulders, and prepared to step into the spotlight. Behind the applause, hidden beneath layers of polished music and cheerful conversation, the faint electrical hum returned, just a little louder than before. Maya lifted her eyes toward the ceiling one more time, her heartbeat slowing instead of racing, because something inside her quietly whispered that the night was about to change forever. The applause had barely faded when Nathan Brooks stepped toward the podium, the polished wood reflecting the warm chandelier light across his dark suit. He welcomed the guests with practiced confidence, thanking community leaders, investors, and partners for believing in a future built on innovation. Every sentence sounded precise, every pause carefully measured. Around the ballroom, nearly 500 people listened with quiet attention, forks resting beside dinner plates and cameras fixed on the stage. Maya Carter continued serving coffee along the back tables, but her attention kept drifting upward. The chandelier flickered again, this time accompanied by a sharper electrical buzz that lingered just long enough to make her stop walking. A faint smell reached her a moment later, subtle but unmistakable, like warm plastic exposed to too much heat. She slowly turned toward the nearest wall and noticed a thin ribbon of gray haze, escaping through an air vent high above the ballroom entrance. Most people remained focused on Nathan's speech. The jazz musicians sat silently beside the stage, waiting for the presentation to end. Hotel staff hurried through service doors carrying dessert trays, unaware that anything unusual was happening. Maya placed her coffee pot on a nearby service station and quietly approached one of the hotel's maintenance employees standing near the side hallway. "Excuse me," she said calmly. "I think something might be wrong with the electrical system near the ballroom ceiling." The man glanced upward for less than a second before shaking his head. "Everything passed inspection this morning. It is probably nothing." Maya looked back toward the ceiling. The buzzing returned, louder than before, followed by another brief flicker that rippled across several lights near the entrance. Her heartbeat remained steady, but the uneasy feeling inside her grew stronger. She remembered helping her uncle years ago while he repaired lighting fixtures in their neighborhood church. He had taught her that strange sounds and unusual smells should never be ignored, no matter how small they seemed. She thanked the maintenance employee anyway and walked toward the event manager, hoping someone else would listen. Before she could reach him, the ballroom lights blinked once, then twice, before the entire room suddenly fell into darkness. Gasps spread through the crowd as conversations stopped all at once. Only the emergency exit signs cast faint red light across the marble floor. Somewhere near the stage, a child began crying while several guests instinctively stood from their chairs. Crystal glasses rattled as people searched for loved ones in the unexpected darkness. Nathan stepped away from the podium, his voice firm as he called for everyone to remain calm, but confusion spread faster than reassurance. Within seconds, the hotel's emergency backup lights illuminated the ballroom with a dim amber glow. Shadows stretched across the walls, transforming the elegant room into something unfamiliar. Maya immediately scanned the crowd instead of the ceiling. She noticed Walter Harrison struggling to find his cane beneath the table while his daughter searched frantically beside him. Across the room, an elderly woman hesitated near a staircase, uncertain where to go. Hotel employees looked toward supervisors, waiting for instructions that had not yet arrived. Without raising her voice or drawing attention to herself, Maya moved with quiet purpose. She reached Walter first, placed his cane gently into his hand, reassured his daughter that they would leave together, and directed them toward the nearest clearly marked exit instead of the crowded main entrance. As she turned to help another guest, she glanced back toward the ceiling one more time. The faint haze had become slightly more visible beneath the emergency lighting. She realized the ballroom had far less time than anyone else seemed to understand. Walter Harrison gripped his cane with one hand and his daughter's arm with the other as Maya guided them toward the nearest illuminated exit sign. The amber emergency lights cast long shadows across the marble floor, making every step feel uncertain, yet Maya's voice remained calm enough to steady the people around her. "Please stay together," she said gently. "There is plenty of room if we move slowly." Her composure spread from one guest to another. A few frightened conversations softened. Several hotel employees began repeating her instructions, creating order where confusion had threatened to take over. Nathan Brooks noticed the change almost immediately. Standing near the stage, he watched guests following the directions of the very waitress he had tried to remove less than an hour earlier. Instead of feeling relieved, he felt irritated. Every camera in the ballroom was still recording. Reporters remained near the entrance. The last thing he wanted was for the evening to appear disorganized because an employee had taken control without authorization. He crossed the ballroom with quick, determined steps until he reached Maya just as she was helping an elderly woman carefully navigate around a cluster of dining chairs. "What are you doing?" Nathan asked, his voice controlled but unmistakably firm. Maya turned toward him without losing her composure. "I think we should keep everyone moving toward the side exits. There may be an electrical problem near the main entrance." Nathan glanced toward the ceiling before looking back at her. The emergency lights still glowed. Nothing appeared immediately dangerous. "The hotel staff will handle this," he replied. "I need you to stop directing the guests and return to the service area." Maya hesitated for only a moment. She respected authority, but she trusted what she had observed even more. "Sir," she answered quietly, "I smelled overheated wiring before the lights went out. I believe we should avoid sending people toward that side of the ballroom until maintenance confirms everything is safe." Nathan's expression hardened. Months of pressure, endless negotiations, and the fear of watching the biggest night of his career unravel all converged into one impatient decision. "That is enough," he said. "You are a waitress, not an engineer. Let the professionals do their jobs." Several nearby guests fell silent as they overheard the exchange. Olivia, the young server Maya had encouraged earlier that afternoon, looked down at the floor, clearly uncomfortable but too nervous to speak. Maya did not argue. She simply nodded once, stepped back, and folded her hands in front of her apron. "I understand," she said with genuine respect. Then something caught her attention. Beyond Nathan's shoulder, she saw a little boy standing alone near one of the ballroom's decorative curtains, looking around with frightened eyes while calling softly for his mother. The crowd moving toward the exits had separated them. Maya instinctively walked in the child's direction. Nathan almost called after her, believing she was ignoring his instructions, but before he spoke, the boy spotted Maya and reached toward her with visible relief. She knelt to his eye level, smiled warmly, and asked his name in a voice so calm that his trembling shoulders slowly relaxed. "Ethan," he whispered. Maya gently took his hand and scanned the ballroom until she noticed a woman desperately searching through the crowd while repeatedly calling the same name. Maya raised her free hand high above the guests and called out, "He is right here." The mother's eyes filled with tears as she hurried across the room and wrapped her son in a grateful embrace. Several nearby guests watched the reunion in complete silence. Nathan stood only a few feet away, saying nothing. For the first time that evening, he realized that while he had been trying to protect an event, Maya had been protecting people, and somehow those two priorities were no longer the same. The ballroom gradually settled into an unfamiliar quiet as hotel staff confirmed that the electrical issue had been isolated and backup power would safely support the remainder of the evening until technicians completed their inspection. The frightened conversations that had filled the room only minutes earlier faded into cautious whispers. Guests slowly returned to their tables, straightening jackets, adjusting chairs, and exchanging relieved smiles with loved ones seated beside them. Outside the towering windows, a gentle spring rain began to fall across downtown Chicago, scattering tiny drops against the glass that reflected the soft amber glow inside the hotel. Maya Carter slipped away from the crowd without anyone noticing. She walked through a narrow service hallway lined with stainless steel shelves and neatly stacked linen carts until she reached the quiet employee entrance overlooking the rain. She rested one hand against the cool brick wall and released a slow breath she had been holding since the lights first went out. Her shoes ached after hours of standing, and the cuff of her serving jacket still carried the faint water stain that had drawn so much unwanted attention earlier that evening. She looked down at it for a moment, then smiled to herself. It suddenly seemed like such a small thing. She reached into her apron pocket and found the folded photograph she carried every day. It showed her standing beside her grandmother, Evelyn, outside their apartment building on a bright summer afternoon years before illness had stolen so many memories. Maya gently brushed a thumb across the worn edges of the picture. "I tried to do the right thing," she whispered softly, imagining the familiar warmth of her grandmother's reassuring voice. Behind the ballroom doors, the music had not yet returned. Instead, there was only the distant sound of silverware being gathered, chairs sliding across polished marble, and quiet conversations replacing earlier excitement. Olivia stepped into the hallway carrying 2 paper cups filled with hot tea. Without saying a word, she handed one to Maya before leaning beside her against the wall. For several peaceful seconds, neither of them spoke. They simply listened to the rain tapping against the windows. Finally, Olivia smiled. "You stayed calm when everyone else was scared." Maya looked out toward the city lights blurred behind the falling rain. "People borrow courage from each other," she answered. "Sometimes all they need is one calm voice to remind them they are not alone." Olivia nodded slowly, holding the warm cup between both hands. "I hope I can be like that someday." Maya smiled gently. "You already can. Kindness is not something people are born with. It is something they choose, one moment at a time." Neither woman realized that the security office had already begun reviewing camera footage to understand exactly how the evacuation unfolded. Frame after frame showed guests instinctively following Maya's quiet directions long before supervisors organized a response. Another camera captured her reuniting Ethan with his mother. A different angle showed her guiding Walter Harrison safely toward the side exit before anyone else recognized the safest route. Upstairs, hotel engineers quietly confirmed that the unusual electrical odor Maya noticed had originated from overheating equipment concealed above the ballroom ceiling. Their report estimated that identifying the issue even a few minutes later could have created a far more serious disruption for hundreds of guests. Back inside the ballroom, Nathan Brooks stood alone near the empty podium, staring at the dark stage where he had expected to celebrate the greatest business achievement of his career. Instead, for reasons he could not fully explain, he found himself thinking not about contracts, investors, or headlines, but about a quiet waitress whose steady compassion had accomplished something that authority alone never could. The rain continued falling beyond the windows, washing the city streets beneath a sky that somehow felt lighter than it had only an hour before. Nathan Brooks remained near the stage long after the ballroom had regained its rhythm. The backup lighting had been replaced by the warm glow of the restored chandeliers. The jazz quartet had quietly resumed playing, and guests had begun returning to conversations that sounded softer than before, as though everyone had been reminded how quickly an ordinary evening could change. Yet Nathan found himself unable to step back into the role he had rehearsed for months. His eyes drifted toward the security director approaching with a tablet in his hands. "Sir," the director said respectfully, "engineering finished the inspection, and I thought you should see this." Nathan accepted the tablet without speaking. The first recording showed the ballroom only seconds after the lights failed. Guests hesitated in confusion while supervisors searched for instructions. Then Maya appeared near the center of the room. She did not run. She did not panic. She simply began guiding people toward the safest exit with calm gestures and a reassuring smile. Another camera captured her helping Walter Harrison recover his cane before escorting him and his daughter away from the growing crowd. A third recording showed the frightened little boy, Ethan, standing alone while adults hurried in different directions. Nathan watched Maya kneel to the child's eye level, speak with remarkable patience, and reunite him with his mother moments later. There was no hesitation in her actions and no concern for who might notice. She simply moved wherever someone needed help. The final clip caused Nathan to stop breathing for a moment. It showed Maya speaking with the maintenance employee several minutes before the lights had gone out, pointing toward the ceiling while explaining that she smelled overheating electrical equipment. The timestamp confirmed she had raised the concern well before the emergency began. The maintenance supervisor standing beside the security director quietly cleared his throat. She was right, he admitted. Our technicians found damaged electrical components above the ballroom entrance. If she had not noticed the warning signs as early as she did, we probably would not have inspected that section so quickly after the outage. Her observation helped us isolate the problem before it spread. Nathan lowered the tablet slowly. Every confident assumption he had made about Maya throughout the evening began collapsing beneath the weight of simple facts. He remembered dismissing her concern. He remembered telling her to leave decisions to professionals. He remembered believing appearances mattered more than listening. Around him, members of his executive team had gathered in silence, each having watched the same recordings. One executive finally spoke. She protected the guests before any of us understood what was happening. Another nodded. She noticed what every experienced manager missed. Nathan looked across the ballroom through the moving crowd until he spotted Maya near the service station, quietly polishing a coffee pot as though the evening had unfolded without her. She was laughing softly with Olivia about something completely unrelated to the crisis, asking whether the older guests had received fresh tea and whether Walter Harrison needed another blanket because the ballroom felt cooler after the outage. She was not telling anyone what she had done. She was not asking for recognition. She had already returned to serving others. Walter Harrison happened to notice Nathan watching her. The elderly man walked over with measured steps, resting both hands upon his cane before speaking. "Young man," he said gently, "you built an impressive company. But tonight, the strongest leadership in this room did not come from the stage." Nathan felt those words settle deeper than any business presentation he had ever delivered. For the first time in many years, success no longer looked like standing beneath bright lights while everyone applauded. It looked like a quiet woman in a white serving jacket whose compassion had reached every corner of the ballroom long before anyone realized how much they needed it. Nathan Brooks stood motionless for several seconds before handing the tablet back to the security director. Around him, the ballroom had regained its elegance, yet something inside him refused to return to the version of himself that had walked onto the stage earlier that evening. The carefully prepared speech still rested on the podium. The partnership agreement still waited inside its leather portfolio. The cameras were still recording. But none of those things felt as important as they had only an hour before. He took one slow breath and quietly asked the master of ceremonies for the microphone once again. A gentle chime echoed through the ballroom, inviting every guest to turn toward the stage. Conversations gradually faded until only the soft melody of the piano lingered beneath the silence. Nathan stepped into the warm circle of light without opening his prepared remarks. He looked across the hundreds of faces before him, then toward the service station where Maya Carter was arranging fresh coffee cups as though she expected nothing from anyone. "Before I continue with tonight's program," he began, his voice noticeably softer than before, "there is something I need to say." The room became perfectly still. Nathan slowly turned toward Maya. "Miss Carter, would you please join me on stage?" Maya looked behind herself, assuming he must be speaking to someone else. Olivia smiled gently and nodded toward the podium. With quiet uncertainty, Maya walked across the ballroom while guests watched in respectful silence. She climbed the short staircase and stopped several feet away from Nathan, keeping her hands folded neatly in front of her apron. Nathan met her eyes for the first time without the barrier of authority or assumption. "Earlier tonight," he said, I judged you before I understood you. I believed titles mattered more than character. I believed appearances mattered more than awareness. I was wrong. A quiet murmur passed through the audience before disappearing once more. Nathan continued without looking away. The security recordings and our engineering team confirmed something important. You recognized a problem before anyone else. You stayed calm when many of us did not. You protected our guests without asking for recognition, and you continued serving others even after I dismissed your concerns. Because of your attention, your compassion, and your courage, this evening ended in gratitude instead of regret. Maya lowered her eyes for a moment, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. Nathan reached into his jacket pocket and removed the folded speech he had spent weeks preparing. Without hesitation, he placed it on the podium and set it aside. This was supposed to be the most important speech of my career, he said with a faint smile. It turns out the most important lesson came from someone wearing an apron instead of a tailored suit. Gentle applause began near Walter Harrison's table before spreading naturally through the ballroom until nearly every guest was standing. Nathan waited for the applause to settle before speaking again. Miss Carter, I owe you something much more valuable than applause. I owe you an apology. The words hung quietly in the air. Maya looked at him with calm eyes that held neither anger nor satisfaction. Only kindness. After a brief silence, she smiled gently. Thank you for saying that, Mr. Brooks. Nathan shook his head slightly. I hope someday you can forgive me. Maya answered with the same peaceful warmth that had guided frightened strangers only an hour earlier. My grandmother always taught me that forgiveness is not something we give because someone earned it. We give it because carrying bitterness only makes our own hearts heavier. Tears quietly gathered in the eyes of several guests. Walter Harrison smiled proudly from his table, while Ethan's mother gently squeezed her son's shoulder. Nathan felt an unexpected weight lift from his chest. For the first time that evening, he realized that true leadership did not begin when people admired your success. It began the moment you found the courage to admit your mistakes and allow kindness to change you. The remainder of the evening unfolded with a quiet warmth that no event planner could have designed. The partnership agreement was finally signed, but surprisingly few people spoke about business as they gathered beneath the glowing chandeliers. Instead, conversations centered on compassion, humility, and the remarkable calm of a young woman who had reminded an entire ballroom that true character revealed itself when plans fell apart. The jazz quartet played gentle melodies once more, their music drifting through the room like a peaceful conversation after a storm. Crystal glasses reflected the golden light overhead, and laughter returned naturally, no longer polished or rehearsed but sincere. Maya Carter quietly stepped away from the stage after the applause faded and returned to collecting empty coffee cups, believing her work was simply not finished yet. She greeted every guest with the same gentle smile she had offered before anyone knew her name. Nothing about her changed because people finally noticed her. She still paused to ask Walter Harrison whether he needed another cup of tea. She still helped Olivia organize dessert plates without taking credit for anything that had happened. She still thanked the kitchen staff before carrying another tray across the ballroom. Watching from a distance, Nathan Brooks realized that recognition had never been Maya's motivation. Kindness was simply the way she lived. As the last guests prepared to leave, Nathan walked toward the hotel entrance where the rain had finally stopped. Outside, the sidewalks shimmered beneath streetlights, reflecting the city skyline like scattered stars across the pavement. Maya stepped through the revolving door carrying her modest shoulder bag, ready to catch the late evening bus home. She expected the night to end exactly as every other shift had ended. Instead, she heard footsteps behind her. Nathan caught up to her beneath the hotel canopy and held out a neatly folded umbrella that someone had left behind after the rain. "You forgot this," he said with a small smile, even though they both knew it was not hers. Maya looked at the umbrella, then back at Nathan. She accepted it with quiet gratitude because she understood the gesture had nothing to do with staying dry. It was simply a man trying to become a little kinder than he had been a few hours earlier. "Thank you," she said softly. Nathan nodded. "No, thank you." There was nothing else either of them needed to say. Maya walked toward the nearby bus stop beneath the cool night air, the borrowed umbrella resting lightly in her hand while the city lights reflected across the damp sidewalks. Nathan remained beneath the hotel entrance, watching until the bus arrived and its doors quietly closed behind her. The following Monday morning, Brooks Innovations announced a new employee leadership initiative focused on listening, respect, and recognizing excellence at every level of the company. Nathan insisted that every member of senior management participate personally. He never mentioned the gala during those meetings, but the lesson remained present in every decision that followed. Months later, Walter Harrison often told friends that the most valuable investment he witnessed that evening had never appeared on the signed contract. It appeared in the moment one heart chose humility over pride. Back in her grandmother Evelyn's small living room, Maya placed the borrowed umbrella beside the front door before sitting next to the woman who had taught her everything that truly mattered. Evelyn smiled gently, although she no longer remembered every face or every date. She simply reached for Maya's hand and whispered the same words she had spoken years before. "Did you leave the world a little brighter today?" Maya looked through the window as the first rays of morning sunlight stretched across the quiet neighborhood, warming the sidewalks after the night's gentle rain. She squeezed her grandmother's hand, smiled with peaceful gratitude, and answered with complete honesty. "I tried." Outside, the breeze carried fresh leaves across the sidewalk, and somewhere beyond the waking city, a new day began without applause, without headlines, and without anyone needing to announce that kindness had quietly won.